I remember about NATO meeting in Bucharest. It was something, I mean, abnormal. I mean, the question came up about membership of Ukraine, especially, I mean, and I believe Georgia just as well. And I was one of the spokesmen over there in support of it. And during the meeting, I found out that the big countries, even like in United States, Germany, French, and all that, had a meeting night before, and they accepted the resolution, I mean, to postpone the invitation of, for example, especially Ukraine, I mean, to NATO. And I couldn't believe it. And I saw, I mean, that the Angela Merkel has some kind of a paper in hand right before the vote has been scheduled to vote on it. So I asked her, I mean, to see that text of the resolution. And when I saw it over there, that, I mean, this is being postponed until the end of the year, and the foreign minister have to agree, I mean, to some of the formula over there, and then it issue will come back to NATO again next meeting, and then it will be considered again if we can accept or we cannot accept. So I picked up from Angela Merkel's, I mean, it was not very nice, I have to admit, I mean, the piece of that resolution. I went around to the presiding officer and President Bush, who was sitting over there next to the NATO president, and I asked, say, Mr. President, I said, this is what has been agreed and it will be voted on right now. So he said, I mean, that's the best what we could agree about. And I said, it's not good enough for me. So I just gathered some of other country leaders around myself over there, went into the one corner of the room, and we start and showed, I said, I mean, do you agree all of this? And of course, then discussion started. And we started to discuss how to rewrite this entire proposed resolution. Of course, the meeting broke up. The presiding officer said, okay, let's take the for 1 hour break, I mean, and see what we can do about this. And we were just like pulling one tooth one by one, I mean, trying to readdress and rechange, I mean, every word in the resolution so that I could bring in closer the date of the admittance of into the NATO of those countries there. No, finally, I mean, I believe we found the acceptable text, which was, and the meeting was called to order. I was coming back with Angela Merkel, and I said, I'm sorry, I mean, that I have created that kind of a commotion here with this. And she said, no, I understand your position. I mean, you were defending the principle and so on. We were more practical, I mean, to see how could it be resolved, I mean, with this meeting, and you just pushed, I mean, that had to be done, this meeting in Bucharest. So finally we found some kind of a solution which has to be postponed until the December, when the foreign ministers would probably find, I mean, some of the difficulties unresolved in that resolution, and then automatically the country would be invited to join the NATO. So as you can see, I mean, we have already almost 10 years since Bucharest, I mean, and that case is still not resolved. No, you know, that's very difficult, I mean, to answer that question, because you had to be the part of that conversation. It could be probably that big superpowers did not have agreement on that. maybe United States was the strong supporter of to include those new countries into the NATO. That's my assumption. As definitely Angela Merkel probably was in between. She was sympathetic to it. I have to tell, I mean, that definitely she was not against, I mean, but she was diplomatically not taking the strong position on it. No, the Russia definitely was against this. So in that situation, it was difficult to expect, I mean, that some of the sympathizing countries which were along still are within that entire group, I mean, would have come up totally unanimously in one vote, I mean, to invite, I mean, and to the membership of NATO, those supposed countries. So one thing it could be said, I mean, that issue still is not resolved, it's still open. Yeah, it was more than that. I mean, actually, when we decided that we have to react internationally, I called Estonian president, the Latvian president, of course. I mean, we were in touch with Polish, and we found out, I mean, that even if we will try to go and get involved directly, we will have problems, because to reach your country, we had to fly through Belarus, and this is where the problem started. I mean, before we actually get together, we got actually the word from Belarus that they are not going to allow to let any airspace, I mean, used by them. No airplane will cross Belarus country, and I mean going to Georgia. So then we decided, I mean, if this is the case, Latvian and Estonian president joined me. We flew to Warsaw. We picked up, I mean, the Polish president. Then from then on, we flew to Crimea to pick up, I mean, Yushchenko, President Yushchenko, and then we came, I don't recall the name of on the border of the Azerbaijan, I mean, where we landed over there. We transferred into the cars, all of us. I was driving with President Kaczynski in one car, and the rest of it. It was a lot of press, international press over there, waiting for our arrival. And those 45 kilometers, I believe, or something like that, I mean, we drove already in cars and arrived in Tbilisi, I mean, right before, actually that meeting already has been started, when tens of thousands of people were there, when we arrived at the parliament building at the square over there and joined the rest of all the protesting and gathering people, I mean, and showing our solidarity. And that actually move was, I personally believe, very important, because international television like CNN and BBC and others actually were present, and immediately that entire picture was displayed, and I mean, and went throughout the world, I mean, what's happening in Tbilisi, and showing the support of our new democracies, I mean, that Georgian people, I mean, in support of their independence. No, I have to admit, I mean, that he was very strong. I mean, there is no question in anybody's mind was that he has any doubt what action to take, and he was strongly expressing this to the people. And at the same time, in our meeting after we returned from the meeting into our general meeting of all the present leaders over there assembled. I mean, he was very definitely committed, I mean, to defend every step, I mean, and not to let or to lose, I mean, that any of Georgian territory would be occupied by the Russian army. So he said that very frankly and openly, that this is an open aggression, that this is an occupation, and every Georgian will defend this to the very last. I believe we were sure, I mean, that it could happen even with our presence, because the Russian tanks were 45 kilometers right standing before the Tbilisi. So there was definitely, it could be happened even by one crazy officer, commanding officer, letting the tanks move forward without Moscow's authority. No, thanks God that didn't happen. I believe it would be starting all kinds of negotiations. They would go for months and maybe even a year or more, I mean, to try to settle that issue, try to explain why the Russians have made that kind of a move. So I would say, very open. I think that European Union, European countries were not ready to come up strongly and defend, I mean, the Georgia against the Russia. No, I don't believe that. I mean, I believe this was more or less a surprise to all of us. Maybe because we didn't know some internal political issues, some conflicts of the minorities. I mean, the Russians, or some people say there was a Russian majority, not a Georgian majority. But that came out, I mean, unexpectedly. I mean, as I can definitely speak for at least some of the people, like the Latvians, Estonians. I mean, in our conversations, we definitely were more or less taken by surprise. We had meetings with him, I mean, in general European meetings, I mean, not one, not twice, not three times. I was definitely, when I was in office, I was with the official meeting in Russia. At that time, our relationship were really correct. I would say there was not a big love, because still, I believe that occupation of 50 years, I mean, of elimination of Lithuanian country by the Soviet Union, I mean, still in everybody's mind, with the older generation, and just as younger generation just as well, it's still aware of the fact what happened. But it was, I would say, a very correct meeting at that time. But after that, with all what's going on in Russia, with the suppression of opposition, of telling one thing about freedom and doing something else, I believe that there is no honestly acceptance Russia as a willing country to become the real democracy and to accept the basic principles of the democratic life and democratic governing and living together with other countries peacefully.